terms without opening about a half a dozen in this conversation here.
Expensive.
Yeah.
The emphasis is going to be on, positive behavioral interventions is going to be one of the things, and I think Merrill touched upon it earlier, is really it falls under the classroom management, which is almost a separate, different category here, discussion, but it really needs to enhance. The other issue with special education is many of these individuals that do display these severe behaviors are dealing one-on-one with a paraprofessional. And again, most paraprofessionals and counselors that you deal with, they're not college grads, they're not teacher, ed program graduates. Most of them are high school graduates, working in there as a /counselor /paraprofessional. While they have many hours OJT on the job training, they actually have very little behavior management training in regards to that. So
and
it
many
becomes
are paid
very
less
cultural.
than the bus driver.
Yes. Without that, well, many in the schools that I've worked with, they were also the bus drivers. Right. So in other words, is they would drive, pick up, and then they're the paraprofessional also once you get there. So there's a huge issue, and there's also a high turnover rate because typically the benefits and the pay are very low. So once you get a person, even with high degree of OGT, they've gone to a better paying job somewhere else. So there's a tremendous burn between the burnout, and I think if you use those physical interventions such as restraint, you're going to burn your staff out really quickly too.
Definitely.
Yeah, I find I deal with a lot of the teachers and the paraprofessionals, and a lot of times they're very nice people, don't get me wrong, but more often than not, they are what I call individual inappropriate behavior reinforcers. So it's like the child has their own person to personally reinforce their inappropriate behavior.
And again, but you have to remember the paraprofessional, it's under the charge of the teacher. So it's the classroom teachers. If a paraprofessional is not implementing a behavior management plan appropriately, it is not his or her fault.
We rarely, though, have special education
teacher.
teachers who are trained to handle paraprofessionals. And rarely do we have general education teachers who have a semester or more of general classroom management ability training.
And many times the teacher and the paraprofessional are at odds with each other as to the cause of the behavior, what to do about the behavior. I see it a lot of times. And, a behavior analyst, I think it was Don Baer, said that when all the adults agree, the child tends to get better. And a lot of times what I see in the classroom is a lot of adults that don't agree.
Right.
And it is an issue. It is an issue that has to be resolved. And if it's the teacher responsibility, that's fine. It's something that just needs to be taken into consideration because it's the same problem we run into in residential settings.
Sure.
The home manager understands the problem. The home manager can run the program right. Some of the direct care staff may differ. Perhaps they don't have a good management skill so that they can get
silos, stovepiping of information.
Yeah.
And
same issues.
And sometimes I also think we don't really discuss the role of other students in the classroom. Sometimes you'll actually see it manifest behavior created by other members within the classroom itself to avoid tasks.
David Day did a really good literature review of restraint and seclusion in different various settings, but one of the ones that his call at the end of his paper was for additional research, and that was what he called the eco-behavioral. In other words, it's the mixture of the teacher, the different students, the environment, the ecological environment of things, what precipitates or what leads up to these causes of restraint. So that's an important area to look at.
Sure.
Is there other research areas that you think that need to be explored in the future, Joe?
We don't even know the prevalence rates. The only thing that we do limited on this is, the GAO came back and for 2 states, and this is like people are always amazed at this, and they go, really? It's not that much of a problem. I go, really? 2 states that the GAO reported actually counted for within one academic year, 33,000 restraints in one academic school year in 2 states.
Right.
So now you have a consideration now. What about the other 48? In other words, and I'm saying is my research has shown that the majority of all these are uncalled for and necessary. So this is a huge issue, and it's not just to one state, it's not a city, it's nationwide. And hence the importance of federal legislation to set standards for what's appropriate, what is inappropriate. Right. And this is what, my colleagues, Reese Peterson, myself, and everybody else have been working on for, nearly a decade is to promote this because of the importance.
One thing I wanted to bring up, and I see the same things that everybody else sees, and if I had to take a guess at whether restraints were primarily overutilized or underutilized, I'd have to say across the board overutilized. Nonetheless, that doesn't mean there aren't instances where they're underutilized.
I agree.
And there are, and I've seen them. And I think that, and I know, Joe, that you understand this, but I think it gets lost in the shuffle because everybody is so, we really need to get these restraints down. We really need to reduce this. And sometimes the emphasis is, unfortunately, it's not simply putting the cart before the horse. It's putting the horse in the cart and then pushing it yourself. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And there's a loss of the component of accountability in student behavior.
Yeah, and it's that, yeah, we do want to reduce restraints, but the focus can't be reducing on restraints in the sense of, I don't care how we do it, let's just do it. The focus has to be on providing good behavioral programming and understanding the children, doing what they need. If everything is arranged properly, you don't have to have an active goal of reducing restraints. They fall off on their own. But I think sometimes, in particular, administrators, I see it in residential facilities. I was dealing with it just last week where they said, we really need to reduce these restraints. And I'm like, that's not really the proper goal. The proper goal is understanding why you're having so many. And not the focus on we want to go from 100 restraints to 20. The focus should be on we're improving the quality of lives for the individual we're serving. Right. And we're understanding the individuals we're serving, and we're figuring out what their needs are and how to teach them how to get their needs met. If we're doing all that, there doesn't need to be a goal for reducing restraints.
Right. I'll disagree. I still think you need something to measure your effectiveness of doing that. And I think eliminating them or to minimizing them is a great objective for many schools, which would mean right away is they need to collect data on it. You know, in other words, is the most important thing is.
It's true, Joe, but there's one thing, there's one caveat. There's 1,001 ways to reduce restraints. Not all of them are clinically significant and meaningful. There's all kinds of ways to do it.
I understand, but when you're trying to measure and schools are not collecting data to begin with, which is one of the red flags right off the bat is, so you have it being misused, you have it being used in numerous times, so you have the frequent flyer effect, and they don't even know what's effective or not because they're not collecting data and they're not reporting on it.
I'm not saying they shouldn't collect data on it. I'm saying that it can't be the only data they collect, and what you see all too often is, and they do it at the state level for developmental disabilities, they do the same thing. They have a big database, just as an example, of all the restraints done in all the facilities in Florida. They have to report all of them. Are they underreported? Probably. It's a typical thing. But they are supposed to report. They have to. You don't see a giant repository of all the skills learned, all the coping skills learned, okay? Everything that they've acquired through the year, all the new skills they've learned to use so that they do not need to become aggressive anymore. Nobody keeps track of that. And that's something that in the school is allegedly supposed to be done through the IEP process. My point is that if the focus becomes too much on reducing restraint and there's not an equal focus on increasing those things that prevent its need, including skills, significant life skills for the children, then I think that things do get lost in the shuffle. And I've seen numerous instances where, Joe, people did reduce restraints, but the way they reduced it is they eliminated all demands, and the child was sitting in the corner of the classroom sleeping.
Right.
There were no restraints. There were absolutely no restraints. But that child got absolutely nowhere. So now that's an extreme, I'll admit, but it does happen. And I think people need to be sensitized to the fact that many people can be very creative in the ways that reduce restraints. And if it becomes the bottom line, it is a disservice to the indivial.
I'm not going to say people will not play the games. I mean, people will always play games.
You can count on that, Joe.
When legislation, the key emphasis is what is the goal is to educate the students in a safe, therapeutic manner.
And it is a tool. It's a tool that's been overused or misused. Or not really defined in its proper use, but it is a tool that still needs to remain in the schools to support people with disabilities being mainstreamed.
And I think you're always going to have a heated discussion on that topic point, but for right now, what's passed the House and is currently in progress with the Senate is for use for emergency purposes only. But again, on an emphasis for, as Representative CCBD and everything else is heavily overused procedure that is done unsafely on numerous occasions.